The stage was set for a pivotal moment in American politics, one that would test the boundaries of presidential power and the resilience of the nation's legal system. As the sun set over Washington, D.C., anticipation filled the air. The country braced itself for a dramatic turn in U.S. trade policy, with global markets and political observers watching closely. President Trump, famous for his tough talk on trade and his America First agenda, faced a major setback that threatened to undermine one of his signature strategies. The Supreme Court had just struck down his ambitious tariff plans, delivering a stunning blow to the administration's efforts to reshape global commerce. Trump's legal team had argued their case with passion, insisting that tariffs were essential for protecting American jobs and industries. But the verdict was clear. The tariffs were blocked, and the administration's legal arguments had failed to sway the justices. The president's reaction was a mix of disbelief and defiance. He was visibly frustrated, refusing to accept defeat and determined to keep fighting for his vision. His vision to reshape global trade through aggressive tariffs was halted, at least for now. The ripple effects were immediate, with uncertainty spreading through international markets and American industries alike. The ruling was a bitter pill for an administration that had made trade a central pillar of its policy. Inside the White House, officials scrambled to assess the fallout and strategize their next steps. Legal experts weighed in, noting that the decision reaffirmed the checks and balances at the heart of the American system. The Supreme Court had drawn a clear line, reminding the executive branch that its powers were not unlimited. It wasn't just a legal defeat, it was a political blow that echoed through Washington. Lawmakers and pundits debated what the ruling meant for the future of U.S. trade and presidential authority. Trump had used tariffs as leverage for better deals, touting them as a tool to bring foreign competitors to the negotiating table. But this ruling showed the limits of presidential power, even for a leader as forceful as Trump. Frustrated but undeterred, Trump vowed to find new ways to push his trade agenda. He met with advisors late into the night, exploring alternative strategies and legal avenues. He quickly took to social media, blasting the decision as a threat to American prosperity and accusing the court of standing in the way of economic progress. His tweets ignited a firestorm of debate online and in the media. Supporters echoed his outrage, claiming the court had overreached and undermined the will of the people. Protests and rallies erupted, with both sides passionately defending their views on trade and the Constitution. Trump's message was clear. The fight for fair trade was far from over. He promised his base that he would continue to battle for American workers and industries no matter the obstacles. The Supreme Court battle had ended, but the larger tariff war was just beginning. The world's eyes remained fixed on Washington, waiting to see what Trump would do next. The world watched as Trump weighed his next move, with allies and adversaries alike bracing for the impact of his response. For the president, the challenge was now about keeping his trade momentum alive despite judicial opposition. The battle lines were drawn, and the next chapter in America's trade saga was about to unfold. Tariffs are a type of tax, but instead of being charged on your income or at the store, they're applied to goods that cross international borders. Specifically, tariffs are taxes placed on products that are imported from other countries into the United States. When a country imports products, tariffs make those items more expensive for businesses and consumers. This price increase can encourage people to buy goods that are made locally, supporting domestic manufacturers and small businesses. Tariffs are often used as a tool to protect certain industries like steel or textiles from foreign competition that might offer lower prices. Sometimes governments use tariffs to put pressure on other countries during trade disputes or to encourage fairer trading practices. For example, if you're shopping for a smartphone made overseas and there's a tariff, the price goes up, making a phone made in the US seem like a better deal. Countries also use tariffs as bargaining chips in negotiations, hoping to reach agreements that benefit their own economies. Sometimes, if one country feels another is being unfair, it might raise tariffs in retaliation, leading to a back and forth of increasing taxes. This can escalate into what's called a trade war, where countries keep raising tariffs against each other, making international trade more difficult. Trade wars can disrupt the flow of goods around the world and often result in higher prices for everyone, from businesses to everyday shoppers. Businesses that rely on imported materials or products may see their costs rise, and these extra expenses are usually passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. For families and individuals, this means paying more for everyday items like groceries, electronics, and clothing. By understanding how tariffs work, we can better grasp the complexities of global trade and see why these policies have a real impact on our daily lives and the economy as a whole. President Trump pushed for new tariffs to tackle the growing trade deficit, a persistent issue that he argued was undermining the strength of the American economy. He frequently pointed to the billions of dollars the U.S. was losing each year as a result of importing far more than it exported, framing the deficit as a sign of unfair trade practices by other countries. When the U.S. imports more than it exports, it means money is flowing out of the country, and Trump saw this as a threat to American jobs and prosperity. He often described the trade deficit as a drain on the nation's resources, emphasizing the need to restore balance. His administration argued this imbalance hurt American industries and workers, especially in manufacturing and agriculture. Factories closing and jobs moving overseas became rallying points for his supporters, who felt left behind by globalization. By imposing tariffs, Trump aimed to make imports pricier and boost domestic production. The hope was that higher costs on foreign goods would encourage consumers and businesses to buy American-made products, revitalizing local industries and creating new jobs. To justify these sweeping measures, he invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, claiming the trade deficit was a national emergency that demanded immediate action. This law, originally intended for national security threats, gave the president broad authority to regulate commerce in times of crisis. This allowed him to bypass Congress and act unilaterally, sidestepping the usual legislative process. Trump argued that waiting for lawmakers would take too long, and that urgent intervention was necessary to protect American interests. The administration also cited specific cases like tariffs on Brazil to justify their approach. They pointed to countries they believed were taking advantage of the U.S. through unfair subsidies or currency manipulation, using these examples to rally public support. Trump's strategy was bold, using trade policy as both economic and political leverage. He saw tariffs not just as a tool for economic correction, but as a bargaining chip in negotiations with foreign leaders, aiming to secure better deals for the U.S. But critics said he was stretching presidential authority by using IEPA this way. Legal experts and lawmakers questioned whether a trade deficit truly constituted a national emergency, warning that such a broad interpretation could set a dangerous precedent. The debate centered on what really counts as a national emergency and whether economic concerns should trigger powers meant for security threats. This sparked intense discussion in the media and among policymakers. Trump's use of tariffs became a flashpoint in the larger debate over presidential power, raising questions about checks and balances in the U.S. government and the limits of executive authority. The legal foundation of his actions was shaky, fueling controversy and prompting lawsuits. As the courts weighed in, the nation watched closely, aware that the outcome could reshape the boundaries of presidential power for years to come. Legal challenges to Trump's tariffs focused on whether he had the authority to act alone. Opponents argued that only Congress can regulate commerce and set tariffs. Lawsuits from businesses and states claimed Trump's use of IEPA was too broad and lacked precedent. The Supreme Court ultimately agreed, ruling the trade deficit didn't meet the unusual and extraordinary threat required by the act. This blocked Trump from using IEPA to impose tariffs. The decision reinforced the separation of powers, keeping tariff setting with Congress. It was a major check on executive power and set a precedent for future administrations. For Trump, it was a clear reminder of presidential limits. The ruling shaped how emergency powers could be used in economic matters. A tariff battle deeply affected businesses and consumers. Companies relying on imports faced uncertainty and rising costs, often passed on to shoppers. The National Retail Federation warned of disrupted supply chains and inventory headaches. Prices for everyday goods from electronics to groceries threatened to climb. An orange juice importer even predicted a 25% price hike. Small businesses lacking resources to absorb costs were especially vulnerable. The tariff debate also rattled investor confidence in markets. The Supreme Court's ruling brought some relief, halting new tariffs for now, but trade tensions and uncertainty lingered. Businesses and consumers still had to navigate a challenging landscape. The ruling was a pause, not a full solution. The Supreme Court ruling was a win for opponents of Trump's tariff plan, but it didn't solve everything. The decision only blocked tariffs imposed under IEPA. Other tariffs, like those on steel and aluminum under different laws, stayed in place. Trump's broader trade strategy used multiple legal tools. So many tariffs continued to affect industries and global relations. The ruling addressed just a slice of the tariff landscape, it didn't prevent future attempts to impose tariffs through other means. The administration could still explore new legal avenues. For businesses and consumers, the relief was temporary. Trade policy remained complex and uncertain. After the Supreme Court's decision, Trump had to rethink his trade strategy. With IEEPA blocked, he could turn to other laws, like Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, or Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. These offered alternative ways to impose tariffs, though with different legal hurdles. Another option, Section 338 of the Trade Act of 1930, allowing tariffs on countries discriminating against the U.S. Trump could also seek new legislation from Congress, though that would require negotiation. Historically, he preferred executive action, but the ruling showed the need for broader support. Engaging Congress might offer a more lasting solution. The decision forced a strategic reset for Trump's trade agenda. His next moves would be closely watched at home and abroad. The setback also opened the door for new approaches. The Supreme Court's ruling on Trump's tariff plan was a turning point in U.S. trade policy. It blocked broad tariffs under IEEPA and reaffirmed limits on executive power. Businesses and consumers got some clarity and relief, but only temporarily. The broader trade landscape remained complicated, with existing tariffs and new strategies still possible. The ruling highlighted the balance between legal authority, economic strategy, and politics. As the dust settled, attention turned to Trump's next steps. The story of U.S. trade policy was far from over. For everyday Americans, the Supreme Court ruling had real effects. The immediate threat of higher prices on goods was avoided, at least for now. Consumers got a break, but existing tariffs still affected some products. Businesses continued to adapt to shifting trade rules. The ruling underscored how global trade policy impacts daily life. Workers and industries had to stay agile in a changing environment. The decision was a reminder of the close ties between law, economics, and people's lives. As trade policy evolves, the focus remains on finding solutions that support growth and protect consumers. The story continues with everyone watching what comes next.